All right, we got a video here called The Rational Proof for God That Atheists Can't Refute. Usual obnoxiously overconfident title. Well, who knows what the argument is. I'm going to assume it's one of the standard top 3 or so. Whichever one it is, I'll give my thoughts on it here, and if I refute it or if I don't, whatever, it's not really the point. The bigger issue is whether it's successful with the people it's intended to be successful with. And considering this is a clip from a Muslim podcast, I think the people it's intended to succeed with are Muslims, so it probably was successful with them, but I don't know if that changes a whole lot. Anyway, let's see what we got here. Have a good time with it, hopefully.
What have you found is your favorite or best, most rational argument for the existence of God? And then past that, what have you found to be your best/favorite rational argument for Islam? It's like if you just take someone from an atheist to believing Islam.
Okay, so he kind of said that like the point of the argument being presented is to convert an atheist to Islam. But nevertheless, I still think the people this is intended to really work on are the Muslims in the audience. I would be very surprised if they really think that this clip is going to change atheists' minds.
The argument starts like this.
Huh. You know, this guy in the clip here, I feel like I've seen him before, but not recently. I think I might have met him in Madrid a few hundred years ago. Seemed like some kind of big shot. Not all that bright, though. He swapped out the big curly hair wig for the small curly hair wig, but yeah, that's him all right.
The first premise is that everything in the universe is dependent or contingent.
Dependent or contingent. I think he's got some connection issues going on, but it's not too big of a deal. That doesn't happen all that much.
Meaning it relies upon another thing to make it the way that it is.
Meaning that it relies on another thing to make it the way that it is. I don't actually buy that. That's kind of just an assumption. And it's an assumption based on observing change in large-scale objects. I think it's very plausible that there may be things about physical reality, including things within the universe, whatever we take that to mean as distinct from things not within the universe. But there may be physical things that just are as they are because they must be, because there's literally no other way they could be. And they're just not known or not known to be that way. I think that this is basically, I'm not aware of it, therefore it doesn't exist. And then that basically declaration of ignorance is being taken as the foundation of an argument that some very specific something else does exist, which fulfills that same role, for which there's equally no indication or awareness, but the purported lack of this property in one type of thing is being taken as evidence of the existence of a different type of thing, otherwise unevidenced, that has the property of necessity because the assumption is that something has to, and we've already ruled it out of the physical natural world for no apparent reason.
If you want to talk about birds, if you want to talk about the sun.
Right, we're building an assumption based on observation of objects within the human perceptual realm. We're looking at how those things work and how those things seem to change and interact with each other, and saying, well, this perception of interdependence, this understanding of causation that's fundamentally based on entropy, the apparent ability of things to be other than how they are, which is mostly based on a perception of the possibly illusory flow of time, simply is the fundamental nature of physical reality. Everything is exactly as it seems. There can be no deeper, more difficult to perceive, or even imperceptible way of things in the physical world, which to be uncharitable may just be because it's convenient to the argument to stop thinking there, or to be charitable may be based on the sort of common sense type thinking that results in ideas like the earth is flat. Just stopping at the level of how things seem to be and refusing to consider anything less intuitive. I'm not on board with this, especially with regard to these kind of questions. I reject the premise on the basis of it being insufficiently supported. I'm open to it being supported. It could be correct, but just stating it as if it's obvious fact doesn't make it seem so. It's not good enough. I'm afraid humanity right now just doesn't have the knowledge to be able to establish something like this.
If you want to talk about the Big Bang, all of these processes are changing. They have certain attributes. They're not independent in and of themselves. They're all contingent, right? They rely upon something else to make it the way that it is.
Okay, having attributes doesn't make something contingent. Otherwise, God would be contingent. Changing over time, that's a little more controversial. Can something be necessary and also change with time? Some would say no, some would say yes. People will argue about this until they're blue in the face. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't change anything important from my perspective. So to give you a bit more slack, let's go with no. Again, to talk about things changing in time is to talk from an intuitive human perspective. Is change over time even a real thing? Is the present moment somehow privileged? Is it something real and distinct at the end of a timeline? Maybe, maybe not. But does the universe itself actually change over time? Well, time is something within the universe. It's a property of space-time. So although things may change from a perspective within time, from the perspective of the totality of physical reality, does anything actually change? To me, it seems more intuitive that the answer's no, but I'm not going to pretend I have the answer. The point is that it's extremely conceivable that physical reality, whether we define that as the universe or the universe as a subset of that, can be necessary in all the same respects as God God is defined to be, including timeless, eternal, and unchanging if those are demanded. The Big Bang has no effect on this whatsoever, and this is at least as plausible as when these properties are applied to God, but in this case they're being applied to something that we already know exists, and it's one thing. We don't need to propose anything extra, which you do if you propose God. So although I would not declare either to be obviously true, which you're apparently all too willing to do, which seems overconfident at best, I at least find it more plausible that the universe is this way. So I guess at this point, since I reject the first premise entirely, that's where the argument ends with me. But let's keep going and see what else we have here.
The second premise is that everything that is dependent requires something independent to make it the way that it is.
Well, no, it requires something that it depends on. That's the definitional implication. You're mixing up the idea that the entire dependency chain has some independent first link with every dependent thing directly depending on the independent thing. Unless you mean that dependent things have to depend on something that's independent of them, but that's not true. You can have interdependency. I think it's more likely that you've either just badly presented or misunderstood the first cause thing.
So dependent things cannot fulfill the needs of other dependent things.
That makes no sense. I hope you clarify what you're trying to say by saying something else and then wiping out this entire statement.
And the example of this is like, imagine a person standing on the ground and he has a person standing on his shoulders, and that person has a person standing on their shoulders, and that person has a person standing on their shoulders. And so all of these people are going all the way up into the clouds.
Sure, but you're proposing a very simple one after another kind of sequence here. There are more possible arrangements of things than a line, you know. What you said was dependent things cannot fulfill the needs of other dependent things. I don't think it even matters how the needs is defined. I think it's just obviously true that that can happen. What you're trying to say, I think, and you're mixing things up, is that a dependent thing can't be the ultimate dependency. Not that dependent things can't depend on each other at all. Even in your example, the top guy in the stack is depending on the one below him, and they're both dependent things, right? But in the real world, there are far more complex systems of dependency than one guy standing on another guy's shoulders. And those scenarios make it even more clear that your earlier statement was just nonsense. I think you're saying things that sound similar but are actually very different because you've mixed them up inside your head.
So all of these people who are in the middle, they're all dependent. Right? They're all dependent on the person under them to keep them afloat. If that person wasn't there, they would all fall down.
Sure, they're dependent on them at least for that one property of having a position in the stack.
And the people in the middle, they're actually not doing anything.
Yeah, they are. They're holding up the entire stack above them.
Right?
No.
Like in the concept of physics, there's like a free body diagram where it's like the force of gravity and then the normal force. Right? They're canceled out. They're not doing anything.
Okay, what do you mean by not doing anything? That they're not accelerating? Neither is the guy on the bottom, or the guy on the top, or the ground. But they're all transmitting force. Yank out a guy in the middle, the whole thing above him is going to come falling down. How is that happening if he's not doing anything? If the people in the middle aren't doing anything, how is the force from the top being transmitted to the bottom? Why is the load heavier the more middle people you have? They're canceled out, right? What kind of a nonsense misconception is this?
Only the person at the bottom is holding them all up. And what's holding up the person at the bottom is the earth.
Okay, so the person at the bottom is doing something. He's not canceled out, despite also not actually being the bottom of the stack. The earth is the actual bottom of the stack. So the first element in the stack gets to be doing something, and for some reason the second one also gets to be doing something, but the third, fourth, fifth, and so on don't get to be doing anything. And then since this applies to the middle people, I guess the top one again gets to be doing something. This is complete gibberish.
And what's holding up the earth? Well, then we have like gravity, etc.
Gravity is holding up the earth. Sure, why not? That's the thing gravity does. It's notorious for holding things up.
So everything is now relying upon something else to make it the way that it is. And if we keep going back and keep going back and keep going back, we eventually need to land on something that's grounding the existence of all of these things.
Which I assume means God's holding up the gravity.
Because if it was only a chain of infinite dependent things, we would never arrive in the present moment.
The present moment? Okay, so all of a sudden we're into a William Lane Craig temporal first cause kind of argument, which we weren't 1 second ago. 1 second ago, we were not talking about an infinite regress of moments. We were talking about an infinite regress of dependencies, of something upon which something relies to make it the way that it is. That's an entirely different argument. You just know that they're both about an infinite regress in some way, and so you're mashing them together and acting like they're the same thing because you can't tell the difference.
It's like trying to fill a well that has no hole.
A well with no hole. So the water just splashes off the cover that you forgot to take off.
You try to pour water in it, it's just a bottomless well. You're never going to get to the top.
Bottomless well? No, it's a topless well. It has no hole, not no bottom. Why would it have no bottom? If anything, without a hole, it's all bottom.
Right? Because there's a thing called there's a concept called like a sufficient cause, right?
Sure.
So if there's no sufficient cause grounding all of this, then nothing would exist at all.
Okay, so by a sufficient cause, you just mean a cause sufficient to produce the effect. Like there needs to be some way of things that is sufficient to ground the other things. Or in the chronological causation sense, as opposed to just dependency grounding, that there's something at the start sufficient to cause the next thing. Which would assume that at some point physical reality was caused, which again I don't find very believable. I'm not convinced that it makes sense that there ever wasn't physical reality. So sticking with more the grounding relation sense, where there's some kind of fundamental reality and every other aspect of reality is just some kind of variation or built on top of that. That I find more plausible, and I can accept that for the sake of argument. I'm not closed off to things like infinite explanatory regress, but I'm more than happy to just set that aside and go, that's weird, let's not bother with it. And agree at least on a baseline of a firm foundation of reality.
So the existence of dependent things lets us know that independent things must exist. Or an independent thing must exist.
Ah, good save. You cut yourself opening the door a bit to polytheism there.
Independent things must exist. Or an independent thing must exist.
Anyway, again, I'm just going to go with this assumption. Let's continue.
And then the conclusion from that is that the universe and all of its components rely upon something independent to make it the way that it is.
The universe and all its components. Well, the components, maybe. Although it would be quite easy to say that those components are not actually distinct at all from the universe. They're just aspects of this larger independent thing, which is the universe. That what seem like dependent objects to us are not really separate and distinguishable the way that we perceive them to be. I think that's a reasonable enough concept, at least. It should be taken seriously even if we don't accept it. But the much bigger issue is that you said the universe must rely on something independent to make it the way that it is, implying that the universe itself cannot be independent, and so must rely on some other external independent thing. Where's that idea coming from? That's not implied by anything so far. Well, obviously, I know where it comes from. It comes from your religion. That's not going to be good enough. I'm not in your religion. I'm not going to accept your religious assumptions just because they're in your religion. I understand that it seems blindingly obvious to you. It's not to me, so I reject it pending further support.
And that is called the necessary being.
Great. Well, the idea that this has to be something separate from the universe is not implied by anything that you've said. You haven't argued for it. Basically, you're smuggling it in from your religion, maybe even unthinkingly, because you just can't imagine that anyone might question it. From an Islamic perspective, this may seem not to require debate, but I'm afraid it really, really does. It's an enormous claim, and I would like some reason to think you know it beyond just a religious commitment.
And so from there, the question may be asked, like, oh, well, we don't know, like, what exactly that is. Like, that's not God. That's just like, okay, a necessary existence, sure. But like, how do we know what that is? Great question.
That's fantastic, but before we worry about what it is, whether it's God or not, can we please go back to the question of whether it must be external to the universe, which you did seem to imply that it has to be. That's a big problem. It's a big gaping hole in the argument. If we can't establish that, I think we're going to have difficulties.
So if we know that there is a necessarily existent entity, we'll say, or necessarily existent thing that is independent and is sustaining all of the universe, right? It's like the example of the earth holding up all these people. It's sustaining the entire universe.
See, again, implying that it's something separate from the universe that is sustaining the universe. Not that it could be the universe or the nature of physical reality itself, which I'm using synonymously, maybe inaccurately, but I'll just define the universe as all physical reality for now. The universe is being treated as this thing that requires external sustenance. The possibility of it being the fundamental reality sustaining everything else is ignored. Leaving that unaddressed is just not good enough.
In the universe, we see a plethora of things. We see organization, we see beauty, we see design, we see certain constants that are kind of perfectly calibrated in order for humans to exist.
Seems that for some reason we're shifting into a design argument now.
We also see that the universe before the Big Bang was kind of one point.
Yeah, well, sort of. And this is why, depending on how you define the word universe, treating it as synonymous with all of physical reality could be a little too narrow, because it could just refer to space-time and matter and energy as we're familiar with it, and whatever it was that was there to expand, leaving everything else aside, if there is anything else. But other times it is just defined as physical reality. Yes, it causes confusion. The problem with talking about the state of things at the moment of expansion, or talking about what the state of things was beyond whatever it was that expanded, and whether there was anything beyond that, and what exactly that means, or what that might have been like, is that we can't really infer any of that from anything we can observe. What we can infer from observing the universe is probably not that much, at least currently and maybe permanently. We can't really access physics beyond what we can observe, which is within the universe in a completely space-time bound perspective. What is really the true extent of space-time? What does physics really look like beyond that, if anything? What the hell does beyond that mean? Does it make any sense at all? I would say acting like we really know what we're dealing with here is very misplaced confidence. And it's another reason why these kind of arguments just flop, in my opinion. It's kind of like saying, I don't really know anything about this, but I like to pretend I do. And you should too. Let's all play pretend together. And let me tell you what it all means.
And then expand it out from that, which is kind of the concept of the Big Bang. So people will say, oh, there's like an age to a universe, and we start counting time by when the universe first expanded. So then everything comes into creation.
Excuse me? So before the Big Bang, all of space-time was in one point, is your way of putting it. Okay. And then it expanded. And then you say, therefore, everything comes into creation. When was that established? What you said was before expansion, there was something physical. And then you take that to mean that before expansion, there was nothing. And then it had to come into existence. How is that not just contradicting yourself?
So what can we deduce from that? Okay, well, if we know that there's this independent thing that's sustaining the universe, and the universe within it has this intelligent design.
You broke up a bit there, but you said the universe has intelligent design. When did we establish that? Yes, I know you tossed out the buzzwords, organization, constants. You even tossed out the word design as if I wasn't going to notice it. I didn't bother mentioning it at the time because I didn't want to cut you off in the middle of a sentence. But just tossing these words out doesn't mean you've made an argument for intelligent design. I thought you were going to make the argument, but instead you moved on to the stuff about the Big Bang and just kinda didn't. So I'm not going to deal with a design argument you couldn't even be bothered to make. Suffice it to say, not granted.
Well, that denotes that the thing that is sustaining it must have sufficient intelligence in order to design this universe.
It's intelligent design because I said so. So that must mean the thing was intelligent enough to design it. Well, I suppose if I granted the thing made the universe and the universe was intelligently designed, then sure. But since I don't, I guess we'll just move on.
On top of that, it must have sufficient power to sustain everything in the universe. If the entire universe depends on this thing, it must have sufficient power to sustain that.
Sufficient power. Can we define power? Like, you had the example of a stack of people standing on the Earth. Is the Earth powerful, or is it just solid? Like, I would never think to describe the Earth as powerful. You see what I mean? I don't think grounding relations necessarily imply a power level, at least not by a definition that I currently understand. Help me out here.
On top of that, because the universe came into existence within time.
What? When was that established? Don't just say that. That doesn't even make any sense. It's like saying the universe came into existence within itself. It's like a mother giving birth to herself. I don't think you're understanding, most things.
Or expanded out within time.
No. Space-time expanded. The universe did not expand within space-time. And came into existence and expanded are two very different things. In the one case, the thing doesn't exist at all at first. In the other case, it does, and therefore doesn't need to come into existence at first. Which is a problem for you. I feel like you're not even trying. And if you are, that's worse.
Right? Everything came to existence from that single point.
No. How do you hear expansion as everything came into existence? The thing that was there expanded from non-existence into existence? This makes sense in your head?
We also can see that, well, because that's a dependent process and it happened in time, it indicates that there must be choice happening.
I wonder how many levels of knockoffery we're at from William Lane Craig right now.
That there was a point in time in which the universe, as we know it, did not exist.
Oh, all of a sudden it's no longer the universe coming into existence, it's the universe as we know it. Major difference. You probably don't even realize it.
Or was not in the form that we know it as. And now today, the universe obviously exists.
I have no idea what you said there. I'm going to assume it was dumb.
But that happened in time, right? The universe isn't eternal. Even scientists will agree with this.
You did the robot voice again there, but I'm pretty sure you said something at the end about scientists agreeing with this. For the most part, no. The universe as we know it, not being eternal from the within time point of view, sure. Everything else, no.
So because something happened in time, and that thing is dependent on something independent to make it the way that it is, well, that denotes that there was a choice, that before nothing existed and then after that things existed.
That's not a choice, that's an event. Saying something happened is not enough to say someone wanted it to. I also love, by the way, how we're seemingly randomly bouncing back and forth between simultaneous grounding relations and chronological causal events. It seems all very confused.
So now we know that there's something that's all powerful, or has all the power in the universe.
All the power in the universe? No, you're talking about something external to the universe. That doesn't mean it has any power in the universe, or that it's capable of doing anything that can be done in the universe. It lives outside the universe. The rules could be entirely different. Also, I don't remember you even trying to establish this. You're just sort of saying stuff that you've heard related to this argument without really understanding how it all fits together.
That has sufficient intelligence, enough intelligence to design everything in the universe in a specific way, because why is one thing one way and another thing another way?
Is that the argument for intelligent design? Or is that just you questioning why it does things different ways? It seemed like you wanted to make some kind of a point there, but you didn't, so I'll just move on.
On top of that, we know that this thing is independent. It relies upon nothing. Everything relies upon it. And it makes choices. It's a volitional agent.
Now you're just repeating yourself.
That is the basic privatal attributes.
Privatal? That's not a word.
Or privative attributes.
Oh, privative.
Of God in Islam.
The privative attributes of God in Islam. No, they're not. How are these privative attributes? A privative attribute is an attribute defined by the lack of something. Like, for example, blindness, not being able to see. What did you have in your list here? You had all-powerful, intelligent, independent, volitional. Of those, the only one that's arguably privative is independent. God is not dependent. You're defining God by what he's not. Everything else, you're defining him by what he is. He can do anything, he's smart, he makes choices. These are not privative, these are positive. You see what I mean about you using things you've heard associated with these arguments in the past without actually knowing what they mean or what they're for?
Someone who's all-knowing, all-powerful, who's a volitional agent, who is eternal, and who sustains the entire universe.
So all of those are positive attributes, except arguably eternal, depending on what exactly you mean. If it's just being used as existing forever, then that would be a positive attribute. But if it means not existing at all within time, then I would say it's privative. And I would say that's more commonly the definition used within these conversations.
So from that perspective, we get, okay, now we know that God exists, and that definition of God is what classically Islamic scholars have called or defined Allah as.
And he magnificently hobbles to his conclusion of therefore Allah. Alright, in the rest of this clip he talks about how we can know there's only one God and not several. I'm not at all interested in that conversation right now, so I am gonna call this the end. Thank you for watching, everybody. If you would, before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And enormous thanks to all of my supporters. You are what keeps this running. Thank you. Get early access on the email list, list.logicked.com, and I will see you next time.